The budget just finished. What are your impressions about the budget? Because from what I see, it appears to have put in a bit more money for welfare, universal health care, cash payments for the elderly.
I think by and large it was a very bold and ambitious budget, especially when you look at the foundations around it, preparing for the coming system of devolved government. But I think, well, there was innovation. There are some areas, I think, where the minister took some very bold steps. For instance, in the financial services sector, hiving off the intentions to, hive off bank supervision from the central bank. Also hiving off customs department from the revenue authority. So I think there are various reforms that I think are going to impact in terms of growth and performance of the economy. But there are also areas where I think there were doubts in terms of the challenges that are still facing the economy. For instance, projections of growth at 5.2% might be a little bit ambitious given where the economy is currently. And also financing of the deficit, which I think at 6.5% of GDP is not too high, but I think relative to the expected underperformance of tax collections because of a weak economy, the minister might just be forced to dig deeper into the kitty, perhaps increasing borrowing. But it remains to be seen how that is going to be done. And
talking about borrowing, there's all indication that Kenya may be issuing its first Eurobond in the next fiscal year. He has alluded to that depending on what the economy looks like globally.
Well, that's in the pipeline, but I think a lot of that will depend on how the situation plays out in the euro area, because I think the last thing I think most institutions will want, or individuals for that matter, is to get into sovereign debt given the challenges that are currently facing countries in Europe. But I think on the plus side, if you look at our fiscal space at 44% public debt to GDP ratio, we are still not in the danger territory. But I guess again, looking at the increased expenditure and the requirements and the financing that puts pressure on, there's need to be cautious, I think, as far as the financing alternatives are concerned.
Also, this very day, the Energy Regulatory Commission bringing down prices by as much as 3 shillings and 80 cents for kerosene. So that respite that people had been expecting for a few weeks now, finally beginning to translate. Do you think it will continue going into the rest of the economy?
That is definitely very welcome news. I think Kenyans will be pleasantly surprised with that information, especially bearing in mind the increments in the last couple of months. And I think we might probably expect a stabilization currently, given that the shilling has more or less remained stable where it is. And international fuel prices have also remained fairly steady. So the most important impact, I think, is on inflation. And also bearing in mind that a lot of electricity is also generated using diesel, and and also its commercial use. So I think this is likely to translate into good news, and perhaps we just might see the government's objective of bringing down inflation to single-digit levels coming to pass perhaps in the next 3 months or so.
Were you disappointed today by the results out of Kenya Airways, a 57% dip in profit before tax? Granted, they had given a profit warning.
If you look at it from the basis of the profit warning, if you look at it from the basis of very, very volatile fuel prices, if you also look at it from the basis of a very, very unstable macroeconomic environment last year, high interest rates, weak exchange rate, and so on, I wasn't really very, very surprised by their results. In fact, I was relatively impressed by their performance, bearing in mind the hostile operating environment that they've been, operating in up to their year end. So, by and large, I think if you look at also their share price performance in the last couple of weeks or months, for that matter, it has more or less factored that information in. Currently trading at just slightly below its issue price. So, I think by and large, the market had expected, the results to be the way they were, perhaps not to the full impact, but they had more or less factored in those consequences.
Right, let's finish off with how the market took that news, and indeed that of the planned rights issue by Total, one of the other big major oil marketers.
Total apparently today performed very well. I believe it was the share that went up by the highest percentage, and I think that is also on the basis of the anticipation, getting preference shares from the parent company. That perhaps is a very, very good move, especially bearing in mind the current environment of high interest rates. So cheap capital, I think, at this point is very, very welcome, with the possibility of perhaps having it converted into into equity capital later on, or through a rights issue. I think they'll have to decide on that. But I think the market seems to have taken that information quite well.